You are too fancy.
Seamus, I like the hair.
Thank you. It's a DIY job, but I had to get to it.
Yep, I know what you mean.
How you guys holding up?
It's been a week,
Yeah, right.
and it's only Wednesday.
Yeah, I hear you.
Seems to be a
Hello.
lot of that going around.
Can I get a sound check here, please?
I can hear you just fine, Andrew.
Yep, sounds good to me too.
Yeah, I hear you too.
Supposed to do a 1-2 check like you're at the mic,
Yes,
open
check,
mic
check.
night. Check, check.
Martin, is that purple hair you have?
It is.
What's that?
I've actually had it since Easter, but you guys haven't noticed.
I didn't think it was purple last time I saw you. I
Yeah,
thought it was a
it's
different
been
color.
purple since Easter. But yeah, I have a goddaughter who is cooped up down in Virginia, and I dyed it, for Easter just to surprise her and stuff. And everybody's liked it so far, so I've kept it.
Very nice. It's more pronounced than it's been in the past.
Well, I'm under a brighter light
Probably
too. I
just the
think.
lighting.
Yeah, I'm sitting in a different location. But.
Cool.
Look like Elvis
fun.
Costello.
Brian and I are boring. We never really change our hair.
No, very consistent.
So we're not sure if David will be joining us tonight.
No, he's not, right, Thomas?
He said if he did join at all, he would join only briefly. He injured himself in his garden and is in some pain and can't really focus on an evening meeting. I think we all understand that.
Yep.
Well, we've got 6. We've got a quorum.
Maybe they're updating their Zoom app.
Oh, there's Seamus. There's Seamus.
Andrew, I like your light fixture.
You like the antler look? Thank you. Here, let me give you a close up.
Is it real?
No, it's actually fake.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
How many points?
Those are elk. Those are small elk, but it goes with my outdoor motif. As you can see, there's a pheasant in the background.
You belong to Ducks Unlimited?
I've done at times I have, but that's an excellent organization.
It sure is.
I like it. I like ducks. You know what they say about ducks? They're the happiest bird in the barnyard.
Go to be a
And-
duck.
All in a row.
Keep them all in a row. That's funny.
All right. Our this evening we are taking a discussion item before the applicants because Tony Iacovelli from Department of Public Works is supposed to be with us from 7:30 on, and we wanted to get him up and complete so he can leave the meeting before any other business. No point in calling it to order until we know that he's available.
So I don't know if any of the phone numbers that are listed as people watching the meeting, if one of them is Tony, maybe he could raise his hand.
To do that, press *9. It's been unmuted.
I'm unmuted. This is Tony.
Okay.
All right. Thank you for joining us. And with that, I know that we can call this meeting to order. So can I get a motion to open the meeting?
Second.
I'll make that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Meeting is open. Folks at home, thank you for joining us. And if you need to be heard during any public comment portion, use the raise your hand function. If you're on Zoom, it ought to be a button down the bottom. And if you are dialing in, it's *9. If you want to comment during any public comment portion, I appreciate your attention to public affairs of the village. The first item I'm going to call is the discussion item 2A on the agenda for the Department of Public Works and sensitive area process. Mr. Accavelli, I heard you on the phone. Thank you for joining us. And what I wanted to ask you is you know your job better than I ever will. I wanted to ask you to explain to me how it is Department of Public Works goes about incorporating environmental and water quality and runoff best practices when it has occasion to operate in sensitive areas.
We do everything that we're supposed to do legally. We try to. We don't work in areas in the rivers or near the rivers as often as people think we do. The only thing we normally do is just remove, any trees that fall into the river so that there's no flooding conditions, any log branches. The Jefferson Avenue parking lot, we clear that every year. All we do is take the old bamboo out of there, so that it's easier to get through when we're trying to do the weed whacking and cleaning up of the lot.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this way. When you know that there's a job, like you said, annually, there's some clearing at the Jefferson Avenue parking lot. When you know there's a job that is going to put the work close to a sensitive area like the river, whose job is it to think about whether that's going to have an environmental impact and if there are any best practices that ought to be involved, that ought to be followed?
It would normally be one of the foremen that are out there doing the work, and clearing the dead bamboo that was on top. We didn't go down the side of the bank of the river, so we weren't doing anything near the river, just the top of the bank and the parking lot side. Okay.
And so when you have a job, for example, and I don't want to harp on a particular example, I'm more interested in talking about the process than one job. But so to use that as an example, when you know you're going to be using, when you know you're going to be like at the Jefferson Avenue parking lot, which is not down on the bank but near the river, and you're going to be using heavy equipment. Do the foreman have any guidelines for considering whether there's going to be exposed soil when they're done? If you use tracks, for example, you might chew it up and leave exposed soil that could cause runoff into the river. Is that a thing that they think about ahead of time, or did you see what happens?
No, because we don't normally. I know what the pictures were trying to show. But we were not digging up on the bank of the parking lot. We were just removing the debris and loading it with the loader, as we do every year, except for we used a small little loader because there's always cars parked there. We have to take parking away to do this. This year, because of the pandemic, we didn't have to remove any cars. A lot have been empty for 3 months now. So we brought in the regular machine that we go in and we get the job done in a couple of days and we're out of there because of the no parking. But we weren't digging up on the bank. We just removed the debris. That's all we did.
Weren't trees also removed?
Dead trees, yes. There were, I think, 5 dead trees that were removed on the easterly side of the parking lot.
Right, they were dead, but they needed to be cut down?
Well, actually, there were 2 of them were laying down. The other 2 were laying in the trees that were live. They were holding them up.
That's right along the bank of the river, correct?
On the top of the bank, yes.
All right.
Tony, can I ask you a couple questions?
Sure.
Does the village have a brush hog in the inventory?
A brush hog?
Yeah, like a heavy duty mower?
We do, yes.
In the future, can you mow down that bamboo rather than rip it out? The reason being is that when there's exposed bare soil, it tends to be more prone to erosion than when there's a root system there. So can mowing be a form of control? And if bamboo has to be tall to survive, in my experience, if you continue to mow it, it can't survive, and you get more native grasses that come up that are more amenable to mowing. Could that be an alternative?
It could be, but it's a alternative that doesn't work during the regular year because of all the cars that are parked there.
Right.
We have to take parking away for a couple of days just to clear the bamboo, the old bamboo. The new bamboo, as we're talking, it's 4 feet high right now. The
Okay.
bank is completely bamboo. We don't go to the root system. We just take the dead stalks. That's all
Yeah.
we do. And there's piles of it. There's a lot of it.
Okay, in the future, when you take out the bamboo, can you seed it with some kind of rye or some kind of fast growing grass instead?
Yes, and actually we did that this year.
Oh, good.
We
Okay.
seeded it. It took growth, got up to about 3-4 inches, and then the bamboo just overtook it.
Yeah, yeah.
Like I said, that whole bank is solid bamboo again, about 4 feet, 5 feet high.
I wanted to sort of have the conversation about process. You said that it's the foremen who are supposed to do the thinking about, what they should and shouldn't be doing out on the job. Is there any document they can look to or any training they have that tells them, for example, how close to the river it's okay to have exposed soil when they're done with the job?
We don't have any document, but I can probably get them if needed. Again, we don't work next to do any kind of work on the riverside of the banks. We just remove debris. That's all we do. We don't do any digging, trenching, anything.
Sure,
Yeah.
but whether there's increased erosion kind of depends in part, even if you're just removing debris. If you're rolling equipment close to the bank, even if it's not down on the bank, sometimes that's going to leave a greater possibility for erosion. Fair to say?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So what I'm asking is there anything that your foreman have to look to that says, if I'm going to be this close or if I'm going to be under these conditions, this is what I have to do to make sure that there's no exposed soil, or if there is some, here's when I know I have to use hay bales. Is there something they can look to that tells them that, or do they just have to sort of figure that out by ear?
Again, like I said, we don't work on the slope of the bank in the river. We do everything from the top and then, to the mainland. So we've never really been in this situation before.
Okay. Are there other jobs that DPW's had to do, and they say over the last 5 years or so, that maybe are not regular things, but that have caused DPW to use heavy equipment close to the river or close to shore, or in a place where it's an environmentally sensitive area?
No, not at all. And if there is anything like that, then we bring contractors in.
Okay. If DPW finds that there's something that needs to be done in a wetland or marshland environment or a sensitive environmental area, do you do the same thing? You look to contractors to do it instead of trying to handle it in-house?
That's correct.
Okay. And when you do that, whose job is it to make sure that those contractors understand the best practices for environmental protection for the job they're doing?
Normally, if the contract is brought in for something like that, or if we had an engineer, they would do it. Now we have consulting engineers, they would handle that type of a project.
Okay, thank you. And so when there are, I think it's fair to say that for having, sort of seen what happened with Jefferson Avenue, there's a chance for some runoff if there's exposed soil, even somewhat up the bank away from the river itself. I think it's fair to say we all learned that this time. Yeah. So, is there anything that you're going to put into place for the work, any best practice or rule of thumb for the foreman for future work in the Columbus Park area or next to Jefferson Avenue parking lot that prevents exposed soil being left between the bank and the path?
I'm apparently, you're looking for something, and I will try to come up with something and approach our consulting engineers and see how what they feel and what guidelines we should be following. It'll probably be my best bet.
That'd be terrific. And in us doing our job on the commission, it'd be helpful to know what that is. I don't mean to make you hang around late at night any more than necessary, but I'm going to communicate with the village manager about that, just so that we know when you know what you're going to tell your 4 people about that kind of work, just so that we know that it's in place. I don't have any more questions for you, but if there's anything you want to know from me, I'll answer.
No, not really. Like I said, we'll come up with some sort of guideline, and I'll talk to the village manager also about working with the consulting engineer to come up with some sort of a little written plan.
That's helpful. Thank you for your time. If any of the other commissioners have questions, I don't mean to cut it short. You can go ahead.
Yeah,
Thank you, Mr. Accavelli.
No problem.
I wanted to thank you, Tony.
Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for letting me go first. I appreciate it.
Really appreciate your time.
Yeah,
Okay.
Commissioner Burt?
Yeah.
So is there a way that if they are going to do work on a slope that goes down toward one of our water bodies, that we could get some type of a notification that at least it would be a process, right?
So Tony, I think I saw you come in a little late on the discussion, and the discussion we had is if they're actually on the slope, they don't do the job at all. If they're on the slope down to the waterway, they're going to be calling in contractors. They don't want to do work in the slope down to a waterway or in a wetland or in a sensitive environmental area. They make sure a contractor does it, and the contractor is responsible for researching best practices and satisfying everybody they know what they're doing without doing any damage. What Mr. Accavelli was telling us is that they had previously, since they only clear brush and don't go down onto the bank at Jefferson Avenue lot, they hadn't thought that it required the same kind of the outsourcing or the same kind of care. And after this, he's going to come up with some more specific work practices to make sure that even farther from the waterway up on the flat surface at Jefferson Avenue, they're not going to have any exposed soil, and they'll make sure they don't leave it in an erosion condition. So they don't ever want to be down on the bank.
Right. I did come in a bit late and I apologize. I just couldn't get my Zoom to work. But I think the fact that it's not our people, it's a contractor, that makes it even more more important for some type of a process to be in place. And again, so if they're not on the slope, can we get notified when a contractor will be going down on the slope toward a water body?
Well, I want to add to that because we need a wetlands. correct?
I guess that's where I'm driving at, Doreen. If a contract is on a bank going toward the river, it's most likely a wetland, and therefore a wetlands permit is needed. And so it doesn't seem like there's a process right now for the contractors. So what I'm thinking that maybe there should be, and then if it's determined that it's not a wetland, then okay, maybe just general best practices are okay. But if in fact it is a wetland, then you do need the permit. So, I think it's probably at least a two-phase process where phase one is, okay, is it a wetland? If not, okay, then here are the best practices that should be used. Two is if it is a wetland, then okay, get a wetlands permit.
Well, I just brought up the wetlands permit scenario because it includes work in lakes, ponds, rivers, water bodies, and tidal and freshwater wetlands.
So, Mr. Roccavelli, this may be one more thing you can answer for me. So when DPW has a job that they don't want to do because it's in a wetland and it goes out to a contractor, is that supervised under you through DPW, or does it go through village manager and around you?
It goes normally village manager, and then to our village engineer if we have one, or to the consulting engineer.
And not through you?
That's correct.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
may work with the project just to get them, this is what we need, this is what we're trying to do. And then, they'll take the lead and do what they have to do to get people in there to do it.
Okay, thank you. So, Commissioner Gelbert, you make a real good point. It's not a Tony Acavella point, but it's a real good point. Where there are contractors working in a wetland, we need to make sure we understand how that's permitted and make sure that we get a look at it, because that is within our jurisdiction. That's wetland permit eligible, and we should treat that with the same care and consideration we do everybody else who works in a wetland. We pulled in Mr. Accavelli from DPW after hearing from some citizens, and we needed an explanation of what happened in this particular incident and how they incorporate best practices. Working in wetlands is something that he's telling us he's not going to do. You're right that we need to be careful about how that's done with contractors, but that's not a him issue. I think we ought to. This sounds like a working group issue that we ought to figure out with the village manager what the current process is and if it needs to be changed, so that we understand what contractors are doing. But that's not our own DPW, so that goes around them, and I don't want to keep the guy up late if that's not something he can give us any shed any light on. Tony, do you want to Tony Gelber, do you want to take that offline with me early next week?
Sure, I don't have a problem with that. The only other thought that I had at the moment was, the citizen kind of complaint. Do we want to open this up to any questions from the public at this time, or at some later date?
I can pretty much guarantee that at least one of the two citizens who've been concerned with this are on. So if they are and they want to raise their hand and speak, I have no problem with opening this to public comment.
Chairman Burt, before we do that, can I raise another issue when it comes to consistency?
Sure.
Since outside contractors may well be working in wetlands, I would think that an RFP is done, a request for proposal for the contractor to work in a wetland. Consistency not only is done for projects and so on and so forth, it's done for funding to approve a project. So we already have the mechanism in place. We just need the working pieces to be better organized.
Okay. Good point. All right, so let's see if we've got members of the public who want to be heard.
There is one person, a Stuart.
Stuart Teekert. Okay.
Right, I'm unmuting them.
Good evening.
Good evening.
In addition to how the work is performed, there's the ongoing issue of an open channel from the parking lot down to the river. Currently what's there is a couple hay bales and what I would describe as a poorly installed piece of silt fence. I think truly a long-term solution would be a catch basin with some kind of, basic stormwater management control, even if it's just the sump that's regularly cleaned. But parking lots are highly contributing areas to pollution because they have the residue from cars and things. So I think that's the second part of this, is that channel, which I never knew was there, I don't think anybody knew was, kind of exposed, and that's not a good thing for untreated stormwater from a parking lot just to exit into the directly into it. So I hope that maybe some attention can be given to that with the village consulting engineer, with just a basic plan for something that would help with that. That's all. Thanks.
Okay.
Mr. Chair,
ahead.
just to know that we've already got our consulting engineer coming up with a solution, a catch basin being put in that area to take care of it. They're in the midst of drawing up their drawings now.
Terrific. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you, Mr. Teekert, for your continued close attention to village affairs. Mr. Roccavelli, I think we can let you go. Thank you for giving us your time this evening. And we appreciate you taking the time to talk to us.
No problem. Good night.
Good night. Let's call the next agenda item. We have an applicant. Only one. This is 22 Lake Road.
Good evening. Hi, my name is Eric Jacobson. I'm the architect for the Hirschbergs at 22 Lake Road. And I assume you all can hear me.
We can hear you just fine, sir. Thank you.
Okay, great. So I'll just give a brief overview. This is a home that was built in 1978, and it was built with a deck, about a 400 square foot deck. We are proposing to replace that deck. It's in need of being replaced. It's falling apart. I'm going to replace it with a deck that's larger, 745 square feet. I'd also like to mention that the deck, when it was originally built, was probably not in violation of a zoning setback, the rear yard setback, but it is now. It's several feet into a rear yard setback. So our proposed plan will remove that zoning violation. The construction consists of 9 hand-dug piers in the back of the home. The deck will be at the same level it is now. It'll swing around the side of the house, but it will not violate any zoning setbacks or get closer to any of the sensitive areas that your board is concerned with. We do have an erosion control plan that was recommended by your village engineer. That is page 4 of the plans. And of course, we did attend the planning board wetland meeting on May 13th and didn't have any negative comments from that board. They referred us on to you. So at this point, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay. Now, this entire project is within the 100-foot buffer. Is that right?
It is, yes.
Okay.
As is the entire house.
Right. I got it. I'm going to let other commissioners go first, and if I have anything, I'll circle back at the end. Martin?
Hi, yeah, I had a question about the impervious surface underneath the deck. So in the current deck, is there actually pavers underneath the deck now? And would that area be increased as well with this new deck?
Right now, there is a bluestone or flagstone patio below there. It's set in stone dust, and there's a bluestone, flagstone patio to the side of the home that we're going to be going over that. Currently, we are planning to keep that and not expand it.
Okay, thank you.
Can you put up your plan or not?
I don't think I can, no.
Okay, so our standard of
I
care,
can,
I'm sorry,
I can share the plan if the board would like.
that would be great. So in general, our standard of care for wetlands buffers is that that you can prove to us that there's no environmental damage from the work that you're going to do to the wetlands buffer and subsequently to the wetlands. And so that's what we usually ask for proof of. And yeah, so let me look at this. So you're saying that the bluestone is currently under the existing deck. Can you use your pointer to show us where it is?
Well, if you look at the original, there you go, there's your survey. You could hold that image. You'll see the
Okay.
flagstone patio right there where it's being circled. Thank you very much. And then
Oh, okay.
there's flagstone patio underneath that existing deck with the angle on it. So that's where it is right now. And we're not proposing to remove it or add any additional.
Right, but you said that you were going to go from 400 square feet to show me the original 400 square feet of decking.
Well, there, it's right there on the survey. That's the existing deck
Okay.
right now.
And,
Correct.
and the addition is going which way?
If we go to page 1, there we go. You can see where it is at the rear of the house there.
You have an,
Here's the grade, and that's where we are right now. Mhm. That's what we're proposing to do.
do you have an overlay of existing with proposed?
I do not know.
So on this drawing, can you use your hand, mouse, your pointer there? Show us the existing, please. The existing deck.
Right, well, I don't know if I can.
It goes
no.
up this way, correct?
Yes.
Sticks out a
Mhm.
little farther.
Correct, yes.
Right,
So
so
that flagstone patio will stick out right where that section line is, going straight above, right there, yeah. Mhm. So you'll see a little bit of the flagstone patio sticking out above this deck or below this deck.
all right, and that patio is there now.
Correct. Mhm.
All right, and then the additional deck is to the right.
Yes.
And what's under that deck? What's on that surface right now?
Right now, there is also a flagstone patio below that
Okay.
with a masonry stone retaining wall.
And Tony, there's some good photographs that we have of this. I think there's one shot of one side of the house and one shot of the other where you can see the patio that's underneath and then the patio that's beside. It's not that photo, Ashley, but I think it's the two other ones. I
There
think
you go.
that's
Yeah, that's it.
one of them. And then I think there's a shot of the side where it's not covered. There you go.
Right.
So does the new proposed deck is all second level or all at the same level as the original?
Yes, correct.
And but it extends further, I think, in both directions. Is that
It's
right?
gonna go, yeah, it's good. You'll see where the stone wall is, just in front of that lounge. That's where the last pier goes, right there. Yes.
And it also extends further on the other side of the deck a little bit and has the stairs.
Yes, it does.
But then it removes a part of the deck that reaches forward into the zoning.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, we pull it back about 5 feet.
And it currently has how many piles?
The current, I don't know exactly how many are the current. I could do a quick count for you. We're probably about 6, and we're adding 3 more to 9.
And are you reusing any of them? Because I think you said you're digging 9.
No, we're not reusing any of them. They're just sonotubes stuck into the ground. We're going to remove them right to the level of the grade, and then we'll put new ones where we need them.
All right, so then when the stormwater hits the existing deck, is the existing deck permeable or it runs off in like a sheet flow?
It is permeable. There are gaps. There are 2x6 boards with a 1/4 inch gap in between. So right now the water just falls right through.
Okay, so the existing deck, the water falls through the deck onto the stone patio, and then from the stone patio, where does it go?
It just sheet flows off to the lawn on all sides.
Okay, and so in the new condition, you have the larger deck. Is that going to be pervious also?
Yes, it will be.
So now the larger deck, the pervious water will through the deck. It will hit the stone patio in a larger area, obviously, because it's larger, and then the whole patio will sheet flow onto the lawn.
Correct. The amount of impervious surfaces does not change in this project, but of course the coverage of a 2nd-story deck or an elevated deck with gaps in it is an additional area.
Okay, so your net impervious surface has no change because right now the water from the existing deck or the rain is falling onto the stone patio.
Correct.
Okay.
While we're on the survey, I have a question. There's an area called clean out. What is it a clean out for?
That's a good point. I don't know what that clean out is for.
Is the house on septic or is it on sewer?
It is on sewer. It could be a clean out for a dry well. I would suspect it's a clean out for a dry well that's there. That would be the only logical place for a dry well to be, catch the storm runoff from the roof.
So the decking material is going to be at the stone masonry wall where the flagstone patio is. That's where it ends.
Correct.
It's
yes.
not near the clean out.
It will not be near the clean out. We'll be a good 20 feet away from the clean out.
Okay, just wanted to clarify that. And are the wetlands and adjacent areas flagged in the field?
They are not flagged, no.
A couple of other questions I have. You submitted a wetlands permit on what date?
The wetlands permit we submitted for the meeting on May 13th, so I probably did it a good month ahead of time.
Okay, now that's what I meant.
Back
So
in
there
April.
was a meeting on May 13th with the planning board?
Yes.
Okay, this is for our commission. For a wetlands permit, the village clerk's office receives and distributes applications. We haven't received circulation of any intent for lead agency. We haven't received information on adjacent municipality because I see on the survey that the city of Rye is across the street, or they're being informed. The survey and the plans don't have the extent of the wetlands or the wetlands adjacent area delineated on the plans. And so far, the CAF checks yes, but the environmental assessment form checks no for the critical environmental areas. And in addition, the short form EAF is very old, and in 2019, the DEC updated all seeker forms, and also you should be using the mapper through the DEC for filling out forms. So we have a little bit of information that we need to get,
Okay,
and that need to be done.
The updated EAF is found within 529 BP EAF Elevation Cert. That's the name of the document with the updated EAF.
There's a new, when was that updated?
It's within the application, the building permit application.
Right? So where's the EAF that was used? The environmental assessment form, which is, that's the old form. The DEC updated all the environmental assessment paperwork in 2019. This is an old form. And applicants are supposed to be using the mapper. New procedure.
Doreen, when you say that it's an old form, is the form expired? So for instance, can you no longer use it?
Yes, the DEC updated all forms in 2019.
Right, but so for instance, I used to work in immigration, and when they would update the forms, the old form was acceptable for a certain length of time. So I was just curious whether it's something where the old form is expired and you shouldn't be using it at all, or if there's some leeway with the older form.
Well, they've changed some of the questions. I can't answer that. Maybe you can find out from the DEC.
Yeah.
But in addition, there's a format for doing this online so that there's a mapper generated of information that needs more investigation. So doing this online, you can do this online, and there are automatic GIS information pertaining to the site that will generate more information to both the applicant and us and the planning board. So my quick answer is, I haven't contacted the DEC to find out if an old form is okay to use.
Also, I did have one other note, and perhaps I missed something because I ran to get a drink of water quickly, but this is supposed to be or I believe it was typed as a type 2, so there wouldn't be a circulation for lead agency.
Correct.
Oh, in that case, an EAF would not be required.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but it's still in an critical environmental area, and whatever. But how is this wetlands permit information circulated per our code?
I'm sorry, what was the question? What was?
When you file for a wetlands permit, according to our code, it's received by the village clerk, who circulates it among all village and outside agencies. I know this is only for a deck. However, different agencies have different agency jurisdictions.
Mm-hmm.
What's missing here is the wetlands aren't flagged in the field, and they're not delineated on the survey or the plans. So we have missing information. But again, when wetlands applications are sent to the village, our code says they're sent to the village clerk's office to, with the planning board, determine whether the application is complete or not. And the applicant has to do a variety of things, and anyone can be a party of interest. This is how people are notified that this is occurring in the area.
Well, this was submitted to the building department as a building permit application, which was turned to planning board, and planning board has turned it to Harbor Coastal.
I understand that, Betty, but our wetlands law says something different.
In 5 years, I've never received an application from the clerk's office regarding any wetland permit application. I'm not saying that's correct or incorrect, but an applicant does not usually go to the village clerk's office to file a land use application. It's just not
This is-
been the
and
practice,
this-
I should say.
I hear what you're saying, Betty Ann, but this is
Mhm.
for a wetlands permit.
Understood.
Yeah, I see the setback line there.
Getting back to the deck.
The entire house is within the 100-foot setback.
Right.
Sorry, Tony, I cut you off.
I'm sorry. No, the deck material currently is made of what?
The deck material is pressure treated decking and framing. The proposed will be a composite decking, such as a Trex product with pressure treated joist framing.
And what about you said you were going to put the concrete, the sonotubes in, and then the posts or the columns are going to be made of what?
Yeah, and then the columns are 6x6 pressure treated, and they'll be, of course, fastened with post base and cap base to the framing above and the concrete piers below. So they'll be 6x6 pressure treated.
Thank you. All right, so just looking at this from a stormwater perspective, I don't see that this addition of the deck is going to cause any additional stormwater in quantity, right? So then the question is the quality going to change? It looks like there's less, it looks like if the composite material is is more environmentally friendly and there'll be less treated lumber, that would be a good thing. Do they have to do a SWIP? They don't have to do, they have to do a SWIP for this?
No, they don't trigger the disturbances associated with the project.
Okay.
Do not bring it to a level of a SWIP.
I would think basically my thinking about it is that our concern about that is captured within the assurance that there is no damage to the adjacent wetlands from the work in the wetland buffer zone. So
right,
they don't have to do a SWIP, but whether the stormwater is acting any differently or carrying anything any different is the principal environmental concern we're dealing with here.
Right, and in general, we asked for an environmental consultant to weigh in on that particular issue. And that could be our environmental consultant, you know, the village hired one, or the applicants, as long as and then so we could get a letter that would say that the project will cause no environmental damage to the wetland buffer and or the wetland. So generally that's our standard of care, that letter.
It appears to me to be a pretty tight area for construction, just looking at some of these pictures. I think I heard that the piles will be hand dug. Is there any machinery that needs to be around? Do you want to speak at all about whether that's kind of a correct assessment from these photos, that it's pretty tight and close to the wetland, you know, to the actual water, and how the construction process will be managed?
Sure, yes. Being that the site slopes down towards the water and there's a lot of vegetation and curbing, there's really no way to get any type of backhoe down there or drilling. It's very, it's just easier to just hand dig these piers. They are going to be sitting on 2 foot by 2 foot footings. They have to go down 3.5 feet. So it's something one person can do in half a day. 9 of them shouldn't be that difficult. And it certainly just reduces the disturbance considerably.
And the demo of the deck, I mean, do you want to just talk maybe beginning to end in some
Sure.
brevity, but just, you know, demo, bringing the new equipment in, lay down,
Yeah.
whatever. It looks very tight to the water to me.
It's going to have to be hand carried down. There is a established stone walkway that goes down towards the left of the property, and that will be used for bringing construction materials down so as not to walk it all the way across the lawn and around past the clean out and then back around the side. So we'd be happy to designate that as the construction entrance. So the removal, yeah, will be, again, done by hand. And then the construction will be done by hand. There's not going to be a lift or anything necessary. Lumber isn't that long. It's just going to be a hand labor intensive job.
What will you be doing with the removed soil from the from the holes that you'll be digging?
We'll be carrying that up either with a wheelbarrow or buckets. We'll just have to remove it back up and put it in a dumpster.
So I
By the
guess,
time we backfill the piers, there really isn't that much extra material.
so if we could get a letter from an environmental consultant saying that there won't be any damage to the wetland buffer or the wetland, and maybe a paragraph on construction process and protection sequence and storage, I think that would be very helpful.
Okay, we will certainly get that to you.
I have one more question at this point. Is 9 new piles the minimum you could do for this size deck? Were there any other configurations looked at that would have fewer holes dug?
So I'm looking at it now, and these are triple 2x10s, the beam. And at this point, I'm going to say that 9 is probably the minimum we can do. I might be able to eliminate 1, but we'd like some type of consistency. I know the Architectural Review Board is going to weigh in on this, and a 9-foot span creates symmetry around the perimeter that it seems like it's you know, a good way to do it for looks from the outside. If I went with larger spans, I'd probably have to use some type of steel inside the wood in order to carry the span.
Thank you.
I have one last thing too. So along with what Tony Gelber suggested, could we also have some sort of, I guess, wording or documentation that attests to the fact that the impervious surface will not be increased because it's not documented anywhere?
We'd be happy to provide that too, the exact square footage of the existing impervious surface in terms of the flagstone patio, and the fact that we're not going to increase it.
Thank you.
All right. I have nothing further.
So I was looking, I know that there is a CAF expanded, thing that the applicant submitted on our CAF for each policy that might come into play here, but I can't find it on our agenda. Betty Ann, could you help with that?
Of course. Do you want me to just send it to the applicant?
No, what I'm talking about is with each policy, when it's checked yes, I believe the applicant submitted it. Didn't they submit the further documentation on each policy? That's part
Yes,
of our
I did.
CAF?
I did fill out the checklist.
Yeah,
No,
that's,
it's the narrative that goes with the checklist.
Right. That's
Yep,
what
there
I'm
it
looking
is.
for. The narrative. There it is. Thank you.
yep, third to last document in the packet.
Thank you, Ashley.
So, according to what's checked yes, policy 7A, what soil erosion controls are you installing and maintaining?
We are putting in a silt fence around the perimeter of construction. So page 4 of the architectural plans show those details.
Okay. Policy 7A, this proposed action will not affect the habitats of local wildlife. Can you be certain? In what way does it not affect them?
Well, we have an existing deck. We're just expanding it. I can't see that we're taking away any habitat from local wildlife. It's an
Correct.
area we're building is already a lawn area. We're building over that. I can't be certain of that, but I have a high likelihood that we're not affecting local wildlife.
Policy 8, no hazardous waste or pollutants will be introduced. You're using concrete footings, correct?
Yes, yes.
In a wetlands buffer. Policy 11, the proposed elevated wood deck is 24.68 above mean high tide. There is no danger from flooding or erosion. That's correct. You have an elevation certificate for the house. 12 is correct. 17 is the next policy. Got nothing to do with this. And policy 44, which is a biggie, because it's a wetland. How is it preserving and protecting the wetlands in that area?
Well, because we're surrounding it with the erosion controls and maintaining it during construction, we're going to minimize the impact to that area.
That's while construction is happening. What about the future?
Well, I'm sure that as part of our bond that we're going to have to be required to submit, the erosion controls usually are maintained until well after the construction, until there's been like several mowings of the grass to make sure that there's no erosion.
What I'm trying to get at is there is some impervious surface underneath the deck, and the deck is expanding. And potentially, how do we, can something be done to minimize the runoff that already exists, but you're expanding it in square footage around the exterior of the house? Like maybe low plantings of something? Because I would think that the property owner would enjoy the views from the lower level and the deck. But is there some type of planting that can be done, since the water is going to go through the deck and onto some hard surfaces, to preserve and protect the benefits of the wetland?
When we hire our environmental consultant, I will get their advice on low plantings or anything that can be done to minimize the water runoff from the existing patios.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
That would be great. So before we wrap this up, Doreen, you brought up some process issues. I think it would be great if we could kind of drill down and determine which of those are issues and which aren't, so that the applicant is clear when he or she or he and she leave tonight. Can we do that? I don't know really how to do that.
Well, reading the current wetlands code pretty much explains the process, and it's with the planning board. But as far as our board is concerned, since policy 44 is a biggie, it sort of goes together. But it's basically the applicant submits an application, any applicant, for wetlands permitting to the village clerk's office, because there's a responsibility in this particular permit, since it borders the city of Rye, to at least notify adjacent, owners, which is anyone in the city of Rye across the street. There are several factors that are in the wetlands. If you look at the wetlands code in our chapter 190, what is it, 2?
2.
There's a process.
The applicant did notify, I'm sorry, they did notify the adjoining property owners regarding this. It's a requirement to complete the mailing.
I'm talking about the municipality of the city of Rye, Betty Ann.
That would have been the village planner that would have done that.
But our code says applications are taken by the village clerk. The village clerk receives the application and has responsibility under our code for a wetlands permit. Because, and I'll explain again why, generally speaking, when it comes to wetlands, we, the DEC, Army Corps of Engineers, have all different jurisdictional responsibilities. And I'm not too sure that, I'm not going to make a crisis out of a deck. However, you know, there are certain factors with each one of our regulations that comes into play. And this is under the planning board. I just am keen to it because we just rewrote the wetlands law, and I remember distinctly what our current law says.
All right, so what are we saying? That the village should be, that our village should be notifying Rye?
Well, yes, you have to notify the adjacent municipality because it's on the border.
Okay, and I'm not busting here, I'm just asking. It sounds like we haven't been doing that in the past, but being that it's been brought up, can Betty, is that something in your purview?
I could certainly double check to see if in Greg's records, he did take care of that since his application did come in a while ago. If not, certainly could do a notification to the city of Rye.
All right, Christy, I'm just curious, where's your head at? So we've got this notification. So Doreen's bringing up a couple of points here. One is this notification.
Our law.
That's our law.
Of the village. So Betty can look into that. And then the other kind of is the, you know, the circulation of this project and really all projects among different agencies. And that is part of the LWP. I mean, that was one of the primary reasons for that Coastal Waters Act, so that everybody gets to look at projects. So I think we've been trying to tighten up this process for quite a while now. So my question here is there any paperwork that needs to be filled out that would go to, say, DEC or Army Corps of Engineers or DOS? Because on some of them, sometimes when they're asking for a permit, that they have to go through that process. In this case, I'm asking, what's the process? Do they comply? Have to comply with that? How do they have to comply with it?
I think I'm a little bit confused. There's the factor of the village clerk treasurer. So first of all, just a point, and I know you all understand this, but the wetlands permit is truly the planning board's jurisdiction. I understand that HCCM has, you know, some ability to opine on the wetlands permit because of consistency and the like, and the LWRP, but just, you know, keep in mind that this is really a planning board issue. So I did take a look quickly at the code, and it does say that the clerk treasurer should be the one to circulate it. I don't know the reason behind that. I don't know the background. It may be what Doreen said, is that it's something to do with village between village. But in terms of the DEC and Army Corps of Engineers, I'm not sure. It would have to be something that I would look into. I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head.
All right, so then I would suggest, and Chair, you can weigh in on this, I think, is that as long as Christy agrees that Betty Ann can notify the village, the Rye, and then Christy, if I know you have to get permission to do kind of research, but you know, what is the process here so that we all know for this application and going forward, you know, what's the right process here? And once you find
Tony, it's filing a joint application.
Okay.
If you go to the DEC and Army Corps of Engineers website, for any work occurring in wetlands, water bodies, so on and so forth. This is in the adjacent area, I believe, though.
This isn't in a wetlands or a water body. This is in the 100-foot buffer.
Right, so what I'm saying, what I'm asking is that we get clarification from Christie on what the process is here so that the applicant can get the information that they need so that they're told, yes, you have to do this, or no, you don't have to do this. So that's where my head's at. So Chair,
Can I ask a question there? I think that Ashley, do you have anything to say about this? I think it might be in your realm as well, your wheelhouse. And same with Eric, the engineer. I'm not sure if they're better able to answer this.
I don't believe that an Army Corps of Engineer permit would be required for this. I think it's outside of their jurisdiction. I would need to check on where the DEC's boundary is, but I think it may be out of their buffer as well.
Well, it's easy to get in touch with the DEC for a jurisdictional determination. There's no fee, no cost, so on and so forth. And it goes by the 1975 tidal wetlands map. So
Yep.
I've wanted to say that I don't believe, or I do believe something falls within, but I never say that because I've often been wrong.
And also the other point about Betty Ann, speaking with the clerk treasurer and circulating that application, again, because I think it's truly planning board's jurisdiction. We do have a meeting next Wednesday. I think it would be a good idea if this is just quickly discussed at the meeting and the planning board confirms. I know that ultimately jurisdiction will circle back with HCZM, but it just might be a good idea since again, it's within their jurisdiction right now.
Okay, this is more an issue of process than an issue of this particular application. I don't think any of us really believe that there's a Army Corps of Engineers or DOE issue here. This is about how we deal with wetlands and wetlands buffer applications. Okay.
I would just add one more thing to that point is that as this is a type 2 action under seeker, DEC, if a permit is required, would typically do an uncoordinated review and would issue their permits independent of anything that the village issues.
Yeah, the only issues that they would have to do, I think Doreen's point about circulation is that they would have to know there is an application to make sure that they're doing their review, and circulation is supposed to make sure that that ACE and DEC know there's an applicant in front of us so they can say whatever they need to say.
And it would be great for the applicant because if they find out down the road, and not this particular applicant, that a permit is needed from another agency, they're outside of the law, and we all look at the application together. You know, it should be a function of seeker, but in this case, since planning board appropriately typed it as a type 2 action, you know, it doesn't fall, but it's a wetlands permit. We don't know where they end. We see the wetlands setback of 100 feet. I don't know what that's the basis of, how that basis of delineation occurred.
And Ashley, in general, what we say, what this committee has been saying is that, you know, we need a completed application, a completed and accurate application, completed and accurate EAF, CAF, and all permits from agencies that you need a permit from, or a letter from the agency saying you don't need a permit. So that's kind of been our standard of care. And so I'm just saying, okay, if we don't need these permits, then fine, we don't need them. But how do we know we don't need them? I mean, I don't know.
Our permit also requires, even though we do not permit this, that the wetlands be delineated and flagged in the field.
So I guess, Eric,
well,
Item that's, sorry, Tommy, that's an item that's outstanding because that hasn't been done.
all right. So, Mr. Chair, it seems to me that we're asking the applicant to delineate and flag the wetlands to get an environmental consultant to weigh in on no damage to the wetland buffer and or wetlands from stormwater, a little short construction sequencing documents that shows the protection and care going to be taken during construction. And then I don't know how to deal with these. Do we need letters from these agencies that we don't need a permit? I don't know how to deal with that.
Well, if it's in their jurisdiction, if it's not in their jurisdiction, no jurisdiction emails have been sent on other applications before. From the DEC.
Say that again, Doreen?
Sorry about that, Tony. We have received emails from the DEC when they do a jurisdictional determination that it's not within their jurisdiction, which means the applicant doesn't need a permit because it's not covered by their jurisdiction rules and regulations and laws.
Right, we have absolutely received that. We've also had problems getting letters from ACE, as you well remember.
Yes.
Right. So should we ask the applicant to get a letter from DEC? That will suffice for this application?
I think the easiest thing for the applicant to do, although maybe it is or not necessary, is ask the DEC, get in touch with the regional permit administrator at DEC Region 3, and ask if the DEC has jurisdiction on a simple deck on this property.
And what
they have plans. All they have to do is submit this information with the address. And I don't know how busy the DEC is, but I just don't know where the wetlands begin or end on this property.
Well, okay, so they're going to deal with the wetlands beginning and ending, and they'll do that, I expect, with the same environmental consultant that they get their environmental opinion from. In terms of sending them to ACE, DEC is usually pretty good in my recollection, but ACE may be difficult. I don't think any of us actually believes that there's an ACE issue here. I don't want to tell the applicant that they need that and then find ourselves at the next meeting saying, well, you got to wait for it, even if it takes them a few months to get back to you. Because if we lay down the marker that we need to hear from ACE that they have no jurisdiction here, we got to live with that. And I think we all think that they don't.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable because we've had very responsive responses from DEC and not from Army Corps. So I think that if it was my vote, I'd say, okay, do the things we mentioned before, get a letter from DEC saying they don't have jurisdictional authority, and
a wetlands delineation, where the wetland begins and ends on the property.
Said that. Okay, applicant. Thank you, folks. Very helpful. Applicant, so you got real clear guidance, I think, that you're going to need an environmental opinion, that the work in the buffer is not going to have any adverse environmental impact to the wetlands. You're also going to need to make sure that you've got the wetlands correctly delineated. They're supposed to be flagged in the field. Certainly we need them delineated so that we know that we've got a basis for the 100-foot setback that's there. We know it's all within it anyway, but we want to make sure we know where it ends. And the same environmental person ought to be able to do that for you. You need to explain through your next submission that there is no increase in impervious area and any effect on water runoff as part of the increased deck area, any increased any environmental effect from the digging of the piers, whether it's possible to go with fewer piers or whether you need to go with the 9 piers you've got. I think you got good guidance on what we want to see next time. We are not going to tell you have to deal with ACE because we all think you don't need it and it may not be responsive, but you should get DEC to tell you that they don't have jurisdiction here. Okay.
And we want
very good. I've got it. Thank you very much. I took notes.
Construction sequencing, protection. And
thank you, Tony. Construction sequence.
Okay.
I got that too.
Sure. Okay, great.
Thank you.
And as to our own process for circulating, that's probably an offline issue that we can. I'll do on a call with staff when we're not taking up everybody's time late at night. Okay, that's our last application for the night, and we have some discussion items. On the outfall jetty, we're in communication with the county, and that's probably all we need to say about that. On the wetlands law, so Doreen, you've had an extended discussion this evening about the old wetlands law and circulation requirements. I hadn't thought about that issue, and to make sure that we are happy with where we are both on the notice and on this, I think we ought to pull that back one more time and make sure that that we're satisfied with how we're planning on having things circulated for wetlands applications, because we've just had a 20-minute discussion of it. We need to make sure that we're happy with that. So I will look at that this coming week, I think with you, Doreen, because this interests you more than anybody else. Just making a note to myself.
If you need my input, I'm happy to help as well.
Yep.
What happened?
All right, so we will take those two aspects of wetlands, that is the notice issue and the circulation to other agencies, offline. And once again, hope springs eternal that next time we will have a completed wetland law to vote on. LWRP update. So I think it wasn't as circulated as widely as we thought it was going to be. Who has not had a chance to go through the LWRP in its current form yet?
I still don't think I've seen the red line that Greg was planning to pass along. I definitely haven't reviewed it.
Okay.
I haven't either. Yeah, we discussed it last time that it would be circulated, and I haven't received it since.
I got your email, Martin, and I think that was just a slip between the cup and the lip. We're going to fix that. I will make sure. I've got a list of things that need to be done tomorrow, and that's another one. Red line circulation will happen tomorrow.
Chairman Burt, this has been on our agenda for a year and 10 months.
However painful it is to acknowledge that, I'm not calling you a liar, Doreen. It has been. That's been on a lot. But
can we move this the first item of the agenda, like I requested at the last meeting, and get that red line document and start working on it?
But Doreen, I like that idea in that I personally would like to see progress get made on this, but we have to get, I mean, what would we even discuss, I think, at least among all of us, until we get a chance to review the red line? Now, we could move it to first if we have a chance to review potentially in the meantime, and maybe that's the plan.
Red line gets circulated tomorrow. We all have to have a chance to see it, and that didn't happen, and we're going to fix that. It will be circulated tomorrow, and because tomorrow's the day I've got to harass everybody and make sure everything gets done. So everybody will have had a chance to review the red line for next time, and hopefully we'll if not get that ready for a vote, at least get that ready to all know what our comments are. So that will move the LWRP significantly down the road. We have a new discussion item, revision of the HCCMC application. This is something that really needs to be a working group to handle, and this one I'm not volunteering for. Doreen, you have the strongest views on what should and shouldn't be included in an application of anybody on the commission. So who would you want to work with to give us comments on what the application ought to look like?
Are you going to volunteer somebody, or should someone step up to the plate?
I'm happy to volunteer if that helps.
Okay, Seamus, that works.
That
I
helps
do have-
tremendously. Thank you, Seamus.
I would
I-
like to, if possible, maybe contribute to that as well, because as you know, I circulated other applications from neighboring communities, and maybe we could take the prime pieces of those applications and merge them into one document to present to the commission for review and then edits on that.
Betty Ann, that sounds like a wonderful idea. However, our LWRP is specific to our community, and other municipalities are specific to theirs, and it's what's specifically in our document.
No, that's
It's-
understood. My concern is that I feel already that our application is lacking just on basic information from the applicants, section, block, and lot, with, pervious surface, impervious surface, key little things that are just part of a standard application. We should really get into this and, of course, have it custom to our LWRP. But I think it's just such a lacking application. You could use far more beef to it.
I agree with Betty completely.
Agree with you 100%, Betty Ann. There's actually a model. There's a model piece of it's called the waterfront assessment form. That comes out of the LWRP guidance book from the DOS.
Yes.
That you can make sure all of those items are taken care of.
Yeah. I would like to do that.
Say. And when you
Yes.
review that, it's within that document.
Yes.
And I
did see
understand what you're saying. I get what you're saying 100%. Many of our applications are lacking.
Agreed.
Okay, thanks for agreeing to deal with that, folks. I want to report on our final discussion. Our final new discussion item is the Shadow Island issue. There have been we received a comment from the harbor master that out on right on the point on Taylor's Lane, there is some dumping, some construction on rocks in a sensitive area. It doesn't look like there ought to be any construction. Nothing like an application came before us at all, and we've been advised that the applicant, quote unquote, had an informal conversation with Greg before he left, in which Greg advised him that what he wanted to do just couldn't be done at all. So we were looped in on the appropriate communications between the harbor master and the building department. I am happy to say that they are right on it. That landowner has been visited and cited somewhat extensively for the posting of signs and some dumping and several other things. There are a number of open items, and those are in process. But if there are any citizen complaints or citizens that notice that there appears to be work that hasn't been that doesn't look proper, it's because it's not, and that's actively being pursued by the staff.
Has the DEC been notified?
Yeah, we were looped into the communications between the harbor master and the village about making sure that the DEC knew about it, and I am advised that the DEC does know about it. I'm sure they will address that with all due seriousness. It's really the sort of thing that absolutely just can't be done. There's people just there's a person just putting up stuff and dumping stuff in the harbor. It's improper, and it's going to be stopped.
Sounds great.
It's nice to see things going as they should, and our village employees were right on that one.
Thank you to our harbor master and the building department and the code enforcer.
I second that.
Okay, those are the only other thing on this agenda that we have not gotten to is minutes, and at the risk of driving Betty Ann a little nuts, I haven't spent any time with the minutes. I want to kick this over to next time.
Not a problem.
These are detailed minutes. If I'm going to vote on them, I like to have actually, read them pretty carefully. So I think we have run our agenda items, unless anybody has another issue that we should discuss.
Motion to close the meeting.
Second.
World record.
Aye.
World record after last one.
Wow. What am I going to do
Time.
with the rest of my night?
Hey, everybody. Stay
Catch
safe.
up on my if you folks knew the week I'd had, I am going to really enjoy being done at a reasonable hour this time. Thank you very much for your time. We all put a lot of time and effort into making sure this village runs the way our LWRP intends, and I appreciate that each and every one of you get on here and dedicate yourself to this every month. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Have a good
Chairman.
Thank
evening.
you.
Thanks all. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, Betty. Thanks, Christy.
Oh,
Thank
thank
you.
Thanks, Ashley. Good job. First time.
Thank you.
She's the
Bye.
best.
Bye, Tony.
Right.